Hi again. Here's the second video where I try to answer some questions that seemed like they were commonly coming up in the online discussion forums. So there isn't a possibility to answer all of them. People's questions were kind of varied, but some things that came up more than once I saw that I thought might be useful to spend a minute or two on was there were some people who said they had issues with narrowing down or making sure you got a source that was exactly on point with something, or maybe choosing the absolute best source. And then, and this is a common problem, the second thing I noticed was people who are in the simulation and game design majors saying they weren't really sure what to do because there might not be a lot of formal literature. So let me just talk about both of those real quick in some different ways. So first, let's talk about how do you narrow down and make sure you've got absolutely the best source or something that's like right on point. And so that's something we were trying to address with the library content about searching for stuff. So one example that I saw in one section was someone saying they were having a hard time with stuff about like makeup or beauty, things of that nature, right? So I think it depends how you phrase it, what you're going to get. And this is a good way to illustrate, right? So I just searched for makeup. But on the other hand, if you think about the beauty or the beauty industry or beauty as a community of discourse, this is maybe a fine way to look at it. But I think that really the discourse community is probably called something else or uses different terminology. So learning the lingo of the community and using that to search is really important. I think you might do better with something like cosmetology, or perhaps, you can see there is stuff here about cosmetology in different kinds of ways, or cosmetics. Potentially. That might work a little bit better because it's the phrase and phrasing that's used more commonly in the industry or community in a professional setting, right? So there are lots of other ways to narrow stuff. Somebody noted that they weren't sure what to do about dates. If you look down here on the side, you can narrow dates. But I wanted to point out to you that one thing that I think is often overlooked is if you click on an individual article, and if you had any kind of discourse community, this is going to work, and you search through the library anyway, there are these subjects for most things, and that could help quite a lot too to get some ways to look specifically, right? So maybe if you've never heard of mascara before, you would learn about mascara and you would use that as a search term. And this will work for, as I said, just about anything. So if we tried something like jurisprudence instead, and maybe I told it I only want the academic articles, and click through, you might learn about some very unusual things you hadn't thought of before, like the history of environmental law. And if you click on this, it will pull everything that's like tagged in our databases or in this database as having that as a subject. So that kind of thing can be really helpful in narrowing stuff down and helping you use the individual terminology. Another thing is, as I said in the first video, you could use an individual kind of database. And just to remind you where those are, they're here at this databases link, and then you could narrow by subject. I also have a link to that in the tutorial. So time's growing short, but the other thing is what to do if this just all doesn't seem like it's working for you. And that often happens in the game design. And there are things you could do regardless. One of the things that I think is most valuable is to think outside of the box in terms of what kinds of sources people use to communicate and do their discourse. So you could do a couple of things, right? You could try looking for different sorts of stuff, like there's a website called Gamasutra that one might have heard of before. If you check it out and do some lateral reading, you learn that it's really good. But there are other things that might be appropriate too that don't seem like they would be suitable at first blush, but would meet that credible and appropriate standard regardless of the or regardless of how it seems at first, right? And so one thing I thought of, particularly for like game design, would be something like this: patch notes. Now, if you don't know what those are because you're not a big gamer, then maybe this isn't relevant to you, but patch notes are kind of where it's explained how the game is being developed. You might find blogs about a developer for a game in development. That could give you insight into how game developers communicate, work together, their process, etc. And this isn't the kind of source that you would think of necessarily like a software patch or the explanation of a software patch, but it is a serious source that's used in that community. And lots of communities are going to have things like this that you might not have thought of in terms of using in an academic course, but that at the end of the day, maybe you can. So think outside of the box, get in touch with me, talk to your professor about what might be the best choice for you, and that could help with some of the challenges and barriers to research. It doesn't always have to be an academic article. They're great, but they're not always the best source for every information you need. Sometimes you need something else.